Hey everybody, welcome back to another edition of 5 Question Friday, where I do my best to answer 5 questions you all have sent in. I've got my coffee, which of course I can't drink. Hopefully you have yours too, and you can drink your coffee while we go through this, but here we go. Question 1, when does the sequence of returns risk end? That is, once we retire, we're afraid of a bad stock market crash. Once we get a certain number of years through retirement, can we just rest easy and not worry about it? Related to question 1, what is the 4-year rule of retirement ruin? I made that name up and I'm very proud of it, but basically it's just a quick and easy way to test whether you're headed for good times or bad times in retirement. How to overcome the fear of spending your savings in retirement. How does the new tax laws change Roth conversion analysis, if they change it at all? And then finally, to manage your taxes in retirement, should you do a Roth conversion, or just take a voluntary distribution from your IRA if you want to fill up your tax brackets? Maybe that's just as good. Is there a better approach? Does it matter? And then kind of related to question 4, I always like to include a resource or a tool if I can. We're going to take a brief look at the Yale Budget Lab, which some of you might find interesting. Okay, so with that, let's dive right in. This comes from Tim. At what stage or set of circumstances does sequence of returns risk become less of an issue? So again, when you think of sequence of returns risk, really think about the 1970s. We had high inflation and some bad stock market years. I think the market was down about 50% between 73 and 74. Double-digit inflation, retirees just got walloped. And so how long does that concern last? If you're retired at 65, when can you breathe easy, right? Well, a couple of articles I'll show you. I'll link to everything below the video. This one came out recently on Morningstar. And what they did, they used simulated results. So they did sort of a Monte Carlo simulation, if you will. And they looked at the 10 worst outcomes where people ran out of money in retirement. And then they went back and just looked at those bad outcomes and said, okay, how many of them had lost money after year 1? That's the first bar. After year 2, all the way up to year 5. And the basic trend says, look, in the first 5 years, if your portfolio balance is lower than you started with, yeah, you should recognize that maybe you need to cut back your spending. You could be on your way to trouble. And so that was the finding of this paper. And another one that was written over a decade ago from Michael Kitces, who's done some great work on retirement planning research. What he found a couple of interesting things. One was he looked at the relationship, let me see if I can make this a little bigger, between the first year of retirement returns. Did you lose money in the first year or make money? And then he compared that to whether you ultimately run out. And what he said was there's not really a good correlation between how things turn out after just 1 year of retirement. He even pointed out, I don't know if you can see it, I know it's a little small, but all the way over here on the far left side, there was a retirement that really had a really bad first year, lost 42% in the first year, but after 30 years actually ended up with a withdrawal rate they could have started with of over 5%, so it wasn't that bad. However, when you go out 10 years, for him 10 years was sort of the most predictive number. When you look at 10 years and how people are doing, that was the most predictive, but even then it only had a correlation of 0.44. You can think of a correlation of 1 would be perfectly predictive. Correlation of 0 would be no predictive value at all. So it was predictive, but certainly not, determinative. I mean, you could start with a bad 10 years and still end up okay. But still, of all the different time periods, he found the 10-year mark to be the best. Now, a couple of things about the sequence of returns risk when we think about it. Let's just say we settle on 10 years. Doesn't matter when you retire. So like, if someone retires at 65 and you say, okay, your first 10 years, you got to be careful and really keep an eye on things. Once you get to 75, you're more or less in the clear. Well, what if a 75-year-old said, well, I'm retiring now. So if my buddy that's 65 when he retired, now they're 75, if they're in the clear, aren't I in the clear? And the answer is, well, not necessarily. And here's why. That 65-year-old, let's assume when they retired, they started with a withdrawal rate of somewhere between 4 and 5%. And they adjusted for inflation each year, which is generally the assumption, not always, but generally the assumptions that are being made when people do some sort of sequence of returns risk analysis, okay? That's what they started at. So Fast forward to our friend that's 75 and just retiring. If you're going to start at a 4% withdrawal rate at age 75, yeah, you probably are past any meaningful sequence of returns risk. I guess keeping in mind that anything's possible, right? I mean, we could have really, really bad times, I suppose, but at least based on historical numbers, if you're retiring at 75 and planning for a 20-year retirement and you're starting in the 4 to 5%, you're pretty safe. But here's the thing, a lot of folks that wait until later in life, they may want to spend more. And historical data would show that they could. But that's the thing. If you say, okay, for a 20-year retirement, what's the most I can take out and still be safe? It's going to be higher than 4%. But by taking out that higher amount, whatever it might be, you're bringing sequence of returns risk back into the picture. So when you think about sequence of returns risk, yeah, how long you're planning for retirement is really, really important in that equation. But so is your initial withdrawal rate and how you're going to change your spending from year to year. Again, most of the analysis you read assumes you'll adjust for inflation each year. That's what the 4% rule assumed as well. But as a practical matter, I don't really think that's what most retirees do. And so you've got to understand how you're going to adjust your spending each year in thinking through sequence of returns risk. Okay, at this point you might be saying, Rob, I appreciate all that, but can you just give me sort of an easy rule to think about? Sure, that gets us to question number 2. And here it is. It came from Joe. And he mentions a book, Jim Otar's book. Jim was the creator of IORP, which was a retirement planning tool that's no longer available, unfortunately. But Jim has written a couple of books. I'll link to both of them below the video. In one of them, let me see if I can pull it up. There it is. He actually talks about what he calls the 4th year checkup. He didn't call it the financial ruin. That was my term. But he talks about the 4-year checkup, and it's very easy to do. What he does is he says, look, at year 4, look at your portfolio balance. Is it higher or lower than when you started retirement? And if it was higher, then you would look at this column. And now something to keep in mind, this is the probability of depletion by year 20, not a 30-year retirement. I think his thinking behind this was if you might be in trouble after year 4, then this will give you time to correct it. Right? And so what he said was, look, if you're starting with a 4% withdrawal rate, that works out whether your portfolio balance is higher or lower at the end of the 4th year. And that makes sense because the 4% rule based, again, this is all based on historical analysis, worked in every 30-year period. But as we go up, so at 5 years, at 5%, if your balance is higher at the end of year 4, you still have a 0% probability, based on historical data, of running out of money at year 20, right? Again, the point of this is not to get to 30 years, but to simply think of it as an early warning sign. But if your balance is lower than you started, you've got a 25% chance of running out of money by year 20. You might want to make an adjustment. And of course, you can see for 6 and 8% as well. Now, you might be saying, well, Rob, that's great, but I'm at year 6, so now what do I do? I'm going to put out another video this month. It's going to walk through a number of metrics and sort of easy ways to analyze your situation, regardless of how long you've been retired, to see, should you worry, should you make some adjustments or not. I'll have that video out later this month. All right. Question number 3. This is from Alan. My wife retired a few years ago, and I just retired. We have both been savers our whole lives. For a broad show topic, how about ways to overcome underspending early in retirement? So another great question, and one I do plan a longer video, more detailed video on. But I wanted to show you and think about, or share with you how I think about this question. I do think there are a lot of different things you can do. But for me, the single thing that helped me the most was saying, okay, if everything bad happens that I can imagine, will I be okay? Can I, even if I have to cut back, I have to downsize, I have to sell a car, I have to really cut, have to even cancel the Netflix subscription. Can we survive? Can we eat? Can I keep the house, warm? Can I find some place to live? What are the sort of the bare necessities we need? And will we have enough to cover those? And I like to do that kind of analysis. You can do it, honestly, on a piece of paper. You can do it with a tool like Boldin or Projection Lab. but I really assume the worst and I really cut back. I say, what's the most we have to spend to survive? I found this resource, which I found interesting, this concept, the minimum dignity floor. It apparently comes from a show called the Retirement and IRA Show. It's a podcast. I've not listened to it. This is from the Bogleheads forum. I'll leave a link to this. But this is sort of the idea. What's the minimum amount that we need to survive? I would ask, how much of that is covered by guaranteed income like Social Security and pensions and possibly an annuity? I would also include in that category a tips ladder, if you have that. And how much of my required spending is covered by those forms of guaranteed income? By the way, I don't think the answer has to be 100% to feel more free about spending some money on some fun things. I don't think it has to be 100%, but I also think, at least for me, if it were only 20%, that might make me a little concerned. I'll say the only caveat is, how much of your savings are you spending? So look, for example, if your guaranteed income is only covering 20%, but you only need 1% of your savings to cover the other 80%, you're in pretty good shape. Okay? So it's not just guaranteed income. It's not the only thing we need to think about, but I think it's very important. And if we can get comfortable knowing that even if the worst happens, we can take care of the minimum dignity floor, to borrow that expression, at least for me, it gives me a lot more comfort to spend more money on other things, the wants, not just the needs in retirement. Again, I am planning a video that maybe goes through some more detail and other things and other ways to think about that. But it's a great question. I get that question a lot. So again, I will do another video. All right. Question 4. This actually came from a lot of people. How does the new tax law change Roth conversion analysis? Here's my take on that. In terms of the overall analysis, it doesn't change anything, right? We're looking at what would be the tax consequences of, say, doing a Roth conversion this year, and then comparing that as best we can to the tax consequences of not doing a Roth conversion, and then taking the money out of a traditional IRA at some point in the future, either because we need to spend it or because of required minimum distributions. That basic analysis, which is what we're doing or trying to do with Roth conversions, is the same. Nothing's changed. Some of the details have changed, and I think what complicates it is this. You're certainly getting lower taxes depending on your circumstances. The new tax laws extend the lower brackets that were put into place, in 2017, 2018. Those have been extended. And there are other tax deductions, right? There's the $6,000 if you're 65 or older, no tax, at least on some tips, on overtime pay, interest on a car, all these different new deductions that have been added. And so one could look at that and say, okay, my taxes my taxable income is effectively going to go down, and therefore it gives me more room to perhaps increase Roth conversions. The problem is that with all of these new tax deductions, you can get phased out of them. If you have too much income, you start to lose those deductions. Now, there are many articles on this. I'll just show you this one from the Tax Foundation, which you might want to check out, and I'll link to it below the video. That aspect of these new tax laws, I think, makes the analysis more complicated, because it makes determining the tax consequences of doing a Roth conversion this year a little more involved. Because again, the more Roth conversions you do, the higher your taxable income. You may enter and even completely wipe out some of the deductions you would otherwise qualify for. I really don't think there's any sort of easy way to go about the analysis other than either working with your tax professional, or when the tax software is available, putting your numbers in and seeing what happens. And I think some of the tax calculators are slowly starting to update what they offer in terms of integrating the new tax law changes, but I think that's still a work in progress. But obviously, we're in August now. As we move towards the end of the year, you'll be able to do it. You could certainly do this by hand, I suppose. That would be a lot of work, and I would personally just be afraid that I was missing something, So I think it's either work with your tax preparer now for planning. You can't wait until next year to do this analysis. You got to do it in 2025 if you're considering Roth conversions. But it's either work with a professional, I think, or when the software is available, or a good tax calculator it's available that integrates, implements all of these new tax changes, use that as well. All right. Our last question is kind of a complicated one. Should you do Roth conversions or tax distributions from an IRA? This is from Brian, and the idea was, particularly in the early years of retirement, particularly before Social Security kicks in, maybe even before you have to worry about IRMA for Medicare, you may be in a very low tax bracket, and it's good to fill those brackets up to some point. Do you go to the 12% bracket or some other bracket? Will depend on your specific circumstances, but to take advantage of those, particularly if, when you get to RMDs, if you haven't done anything, your RMDs shoot you into a much higher tax bracket. But the point Brian makes is, look, we can take advantage of those lower tax brackets, certainly by Roth conversion, that's true, or by just pulling money out of our IRA. We don't need to, we're not at RMD age, maybe you don't even need to spend it, just put it in a brokerage account. They both are taxed the same way. If you pull $50,000 out of an IRA, whether you stick that money in a Roth account and call it a conversion, or stick it in a taxable brokerage account and just call it a distribution, either way, it's $50,000 in additional ordinary income. So does it really matter? One of the things I want to point out is what I've highlighted here. He says, his point was a voluntary distribution maintains a consistent tax rate throughout retirement. It can help you manage your taxes. But then he says, and doesn't have to rely on longevity to recover the upfront taxation on conversions. I want to cover that first, and then we'll get to the specific question of the difference between a Roth conversion and a voluntary distribution. With a Roth conversion, you don't have to wait. You don't have to wait some period of time with the money now in a Roth account to make up for the taxes you paid. If, let's assume that the tax rate, the tax consequences are the same. You pull money out and you get hit with, we'll just say on $50,000 Roth conversion, you pay $10,000 in taxes. If you waited and took it out as an RMD, it would be the same percentage, right? In this case, 20%. Then there's no waiting. If you paid the tax out of the distribution, so you took $50,000 out, sent $10,000 to Uncle Sam, and the other $40,000 into a Roth, then whether it paid off to do this will simply depend on comparing the tax consequences of the conversion with the tax consequences of pulling the money out later. And if they're identical, then it was a wash. You didn't lose or gain. On the other hand, if instead of pulling $10,000 out of the conversion, you put all $50,000 in a Roth, and you pay the $10,000 tax out of, say, your checking account or savings account, then you don't need time in order to make up for that tax payment. It's the other way around. Time actually makes the conversion even better. It continues to accrue benefits above and beyond just the conversion itself. Why? Because effectively what you've done is you've taken money out of a taxable account that will trigger taxes on interest if you earn it each year, dividends if you earn it each year, capital gains if and when you take money out of an investment. You've taken that $10,000 that's subject to all of those taxes and effectively moved it into the Roth where it's not. So I just want to kind of make that point clear. That being said, is there a big difference? And the answer is, I think, it depends. I will say for most people, probably a Roth conversion is better. But you could imagine a situation where the difference may not be that much. Let me show you what I mean. And the easiest way to show you this is through Boldin. So this is a demo account. And I'm on the page for money flows. It's under the plan right here, money flows. And I want to point out estimated taxes for this year in this demo account. I know it might be a little hard to see, but there are no federal income tax. State income tax is about $1,000, right? Now, we can model a Roth conversion. We'll say it's coming from the 401k, and we'll put it into a Roth IRA. That's how you now model a conversion in Boldin. We'll make it 50 grand, and we'll do it now, August of 2025. Now, when I click save, this is going to change. It bumped up, not a lot. Well, maybe it's a lot. It went from 1,000 to 5,700. All right. Now, if we instead say, okay, that's a Roth conversion. Let's just take the money out and stick it in our brokerage account. That's not going to change much. It will actually change the number probably a little bit, and I'll explain why. Yeah, so it went from 5.72 to 5.74. It wasn't because of the conversion itself, but this underscores the difference. Once that money, $50,000, goes into the brokerage account and gets invested however you invest it, it's now subject to taxes on any interest it earns, any dividends it earns. And so, we've only got a few months left in the year, but depending on the assumptions I've set in this demo plan, you see a slight uptick in taxes. But again, it's not because of the conversion itself. In both cases, it was ordinary income of $50,000. It's what happens and what you do with the money after. And putting it in a brokerage account, depending on how you invest it, triggers more taxes. And so just in year one, that's what we're seeing. Now, if we come up here, this actually shows you the difference of going from a Roth to a conversion over the entire life of the plan. $91,000 less at your estate, and you paid $7,700 more in lifetime taxes. Again, it was because the money went into a brokerage account and you're paying taxes on interest each year, dividends each year, and then if you need to pull money out, you're paying capital gains taxes. Now, in Boldin, we could look at the accounts. We put this money in the brokerage account, which is right here. You can see I had a turnover rate set of 10%. That means we're selling and buying and selling about 10% of the account each year, maybe for rebalancing. Some people are just active traders. I can tell you in my personal account, it's 0%. I don't trade my taxable account, almost never. So if I save that, if I take it from 10 to 0, you can see it saves me a lot in taxes because I'm not buying and selling. It has a big impact over time. The other thing that I do, you'll notice here, back in that same account, it's got a dividend yield of 4%. I tend to avoid bonds in my taxable account and high dividend kind of investments. So my dividend yield is probably more like 2%. And that's going to reduce my taxes every year. And it's probably going to increase this a bit, right? So that gets me back to the answer to the question. Imagine you don't buy and sell in you buy, but you don't trade in your account. So you're not triggering capital gains taxes every year. You have a very tax efficient portfolio, maybe low cost stock index fund. So you're paying some dividend tax on dividends, and that would be taxes you would pay each year, potentially, that you wouldn't pay if it's in a Roth. But if you got to a very tax efficient portfolio, the difference isn't great, maybe, and you may be in a 0% tax bracket. Maybe you're in a 0% capital gains tax bracket, or will be. Maybe, you will trigger long-term capital gains when you pull the money out, but when you do, you'll be in a 0% capital gains tax bracket. It could happen. Or maybe you don't actually plan to spend the money. You're going to give it to your kids, and they're going to get a step-up in basis. Good for them. Or at some point, you might give it to charity. And so, there's no taxes there. Of course, you could have just done a qualified charitable distribution from your traditional IRA if that was your plan. But putting that aside, I think for some people, the difference might not be great. I think for many people, it might be pretty significant. And there's also one other aspect, is that once it's in a Roth and you no longer have to worry about taxes at all, it does make planning a little easier, at least in my mind, it does. But the real takeaway is, I would say as a general rule, it's better to do a Roth conversion. It is a little more complicated. Not the conversion itself, but you have to think, okay, how am I going to pay the taxes? Because I really don't want to pay it out of the IRA distribution if I can help it. And if you need to spend some of the money to live on, then you've got to say, okay, I've done this Roth conversion. That's great. But now where do I get the money I actually need to spend? So the analysis doesn't always just stop with the Roth conversion. So it's a little more complicated, I suppose. And I get the idea of not wanting to spend a lot of your taxable income on taxes for the Roth conversion. I get that. But again, if you just pull money out of an IRA, you're going to be paying taxes either way. So again, for some people, maybe it's not a huge difference. I think at the end of the day, particularly if you're trying to work out a longer term plan, you really need software like Boldin or Projection Lab. Those are the two. Prelon is another one. I'll leave links to all of them below the video if you want to try one of them out. But I really think you need that kind of tool for planning. Okay. Appreciate all those questions. The one resource I wanted to show you, and I know we're already in this 26 minutes. I'm sorry. You can put it on 2x speed. And I can talk like this real quick. Yeah. All right. The Budget Lab at Yale. I don't know if you've ever gone to this site. It's got a lot of great, interesting analysis, obviously, on the federal budget. And they did some analysis on the cost of the Senate-passed budget bill. And you can read that here. And I just find the analysis to be interesting and something that I thought you might also enjoy. So I thought I'd share it. I will drop a link to it below the video. So there you go. Hopefully this has been useful to you. If you have any questions, leave them in the comments below the video. I'll help you out as best I can. And until next time, remember, the best thing money can buy is financial freedom.